So I have to ask, Asian efficiency, right? So obviously you are an Asian man, but is there something, I mean, and I guess there is probably some level of stereotypical efficiency that comes along with different Asian cultures, but is there anything more to that, or is it just Asian efficiency? It just seemed like the right way to go.
It actually started off as a joke, to be honest. About
Okay.
over a decade ago, I was at a house in Miami with a few other entrepreneurs, and we kind of had a kind of like a mastermind where we would do stuff in the daytime and then go out at night and kind of like go out for dinner and that kind of thing. And so I remember it was like a Saturday morning. We went out the previous night, and I woke up early, like I always do, and I was just working on my own stuff. And a bunch of other people rolled out of bed around noon, and they saw me that I was completely done with work, and they go, "How is this even possible? This is Asian efficiency right here." And that's when I said, "Oh my gosh, that's just too funny!" So I registered the domain name right away, and so I had it sitting there for a while, and I thought, okay, uh, productivity, efficiency have always been interesting topics to me, and I started kind of blogging about it for a year. And after a year or so, it just started to take a life on its own, because I was just originally blogging for friends and family and just kind of sharing like, hey, this is what I'm learning. Here are some of the tools that I'm using. And every week I was just dedicated to writing about it. And after a while, because of SEO and other people just reading about it and sharing stuff, people just found out about it and they said, "Hey, Tan, like, I really love your stuff. Like, can I hire you? Do you have anything for sale?" And I said, "Oh no, like not at all. I'm just doing this for fun." But kept getting so many emails and requests about it that I said, "Oh, maybe I should turn this into a business." So it accidentally turned into a business. So I'm very fortunate to do something that I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, and I think that we both started our blogs like really, really close in time to each other. I mean, because I started 10 years ago as well and started the blog. And I remember your stuff from way, way back. And yeah, I think we started around the same time, which is cool. So what were you doing before?
So I studied in Los Angeles, and I was going to school, and I grew up in the Netherlands. So my dream was always to move to the United States and go to school there. So I ended up making that dream happen. But then I committed a cardinal sin number one, which is dropping out of school as an Asian kid. So my parents weren't very happy. But I started working for this life coaching business in Los Angeles, and this guy Nick, he became my mentor, and he kind of was sharing everything that he's doing and how he's running his business. And I was learning a lot from him. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to drop out of school and work for this guy full time. And so I was learning a lot while I was working there. And the only problem was when you are in a foreign country with a student visa, you have to stay in school in order to stay in the country. And because I dropped out of school, I got a letter one day saying, "Hey, Tian, it seems like you're not enrolled. Therefore, your visa is about to expire. You have to leave the country in 2 months." And I go, "Oh, no." um, so that's when a friend of mine, Aaron, he reached out to me and said, "Hey, why don't you come live with me for a while?" And he lives in Thailand, even though he's from Australia. So I came to visit him, and we kind of started blogging about Asian efficiency stuff together, because he was very much an operational and systems expert. And so we just started it for fun and kind of like start sharing some of the ideas as we were discussing things. So instead of keeping it in an enclosed room, we said, "Hey, let's just share this information with our friends and family." And then many years later, I'm now back here, living here in Austin, Texas. But yeah, I was just working for the life coaching business, and I said, "Hey, you know what? I have to leave the country now. Sorry." So I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, and just accidentally stumbled upon this, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, look, I did too. Honestly, like I was just writing articles about things that were helping me and experimentists that were working with me. And then Skillshare launched at the time. And I was like, oh, I'll try teaching a class in person. And my first class was just like 10 productivity tools that I've been using, and it did well. And that it sort of grew from there. So I totally get that. So what are some of the worst sort of pieces of productivity advice that you see in the industry or have seen? Not that you've received, but that you see out there.
I think the biggest one for me is extreme multitasking. I'm a big fan of doing one thing at a time and focusing
Me
on
too.
one thing at a time. I think to a low level degree, we can multitask, right? So, for example, if I'm around my home and I'm listening to a podcast and I'm like kind of like doing stuff around my home, like that is very
Yeah.
manageable and it's very low consumption grade, right? But if we're talking about like reading an email and having a spreadsheet open and then listening to an audiobook at the same time, that's that's when things get lost. And so you see this all the time in job descriptions, like, hey, we're looking for someone who's a A+ multitasker.
Yeah.
And the way I kind of discovered it was I was learning a lot about how the brain works, and one of the things I learned is that the brain can really only focus on one thing at a time. And when it's multitasking, as some people like to call it, switch tasking, it's just switching back and forth very quickly very often. And that's actually something that's very inefficient for our brain, and it's very energy draining. It also shows that you're much slower when it comes to getting stuff done, because oftentimes when you're switching, you have to think about, oh, what was I doing previously again? And you have this little on ramp time that you need to kind of think about what you were actually previously doing. But also the quality of work that we do is not as good as it could be, because I don't know if you ever talked to someone on the phone and you were typing an email at the same time. By the time you were done with your phone call, you still have to think about, okay, what was I actually doing and typing and saying, and and if we're running out of time, then it gets rushed and so on. And so when I see the job description that says, hey, we're looking for a really good multitasker, what they're really essentially saying is we're looking for someone who is very efficient, right? And that's the thing that always bugs me a little bit, is when they say, hey, we're looking for a multitasker. No, you're just looking for someone who's really efficient and effective.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, we see that. I see it all the time. People feel like it's the same. It's the same mindset when you hear people say like, "Oh, I just need more time." Like, what do I just need more time. I just have more time, it'd be great, but you don't have more time. It's like that's not something that's going to happen by you like getting ahead of it. So yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, to speak to that even further, I think another thing that we're kind of like getting out there more often now, and that I'm sure you've uncovered too, is like when you think about time management, there's really no such thing, because time goes by whether you do something or not. So you can't
Right.
actually manage it in a way, because first of all, it's a non-renewable resource, but also second, if you don't do anything, it just goes by. So what you really have to do and focus on is managing yourself. That's something I truly believe in the sense that, okay, if you need to get a certain amount of things done, you need to manage yourself to get those things done. And so it's being able to say, hey, I need to be able to identify what's most important, right? And based on our conversations, I like your model of, if I only have 1 hour a day, like what would I do? And being able to identify like what's most important, but then also getting yourself to the point where you say, okay, this needs to be done, and then actually doing it. Because I think if everyone can do as they say they will do, time management becomes a non-issue, because you will then actually get the stuff done that needs to be done, and you'll figure out a way to get it done. Because at the end of the day, if something is important enough, right, you will figure out a way to get it done. Like if you need to pick up your kids from school at 3 o'clock or something, I don't care how busy your day might be, you will figure out a solution to pick up
Yes.
your kids from school.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because when somebody's like, "Oh, I just didn't have time to get to this thing," it's like, well, no, you didn't make the time for it. You didn't make it a priority. Like you don't have the discipline necessarily to do that. And it's fine if you didn't get that thing done, but then don't say like you're going to, and don't make the excuse that you didn't have time. It's no one's, like, to your point, no one's ever going to say like, "Oh, I didn't have time to pick up my kids today." It's so there's a lot of, in my experience, there's just so much psychology and like self-defeat and self-sabotage that goes into people's lack of productivity many times, which is a lot of what I teach is really about getting people out of their own way. But let's talk about to-do lists for a second. So we, from what I remember from your materials, we both have fairly not different from each other. Actually, there's quite a bit of synergy, but different takes on to-do lists than I think most people do. I hate to-do lists in the traditional form, and I've actually never really gotten a good understanding of why people are so bad at it. The idea of like writing just like this list that we're going to cross off and like there's no rhyme or reason to it. Just I didn't learn that anywhere, so I don't really know where that comes from with people. But do you like does that frustrate you when you kind of see that and you're like you're doing it wrong?
Yeah, I think to-do list is it's kind of like the enemy for a lot of people,
Yeah.
and especially if it's an endless to-do list. And when you use your email inbox as a to-do list, as an example, like you were saying earlier on my podcast, it's a to-do list that other people can write on. And so it's an endless to-do list. And whenever you're crossing something off, it feels like 10 new things get added to it. So it feels like something you can't ever win. It's a battle you will always lose, right? So I think putting a restraint there is, I think, really important. Hence why I think there's only so much you can do in a day, right? And if I'm being realistic with most people, like if you get 2 hours of focus time in where you can really focus, I think that's a really good barometer for most people. Like for some people right now, it might be just 15, 30 minutes, and getting to an hour could be life changing. I think most people can get 2 hours done in a day if you really put some thought and attention behind it. But also, I'm a big believer of what I call time arbitrage. And it's the idea that not every single hour of the day is of equal value. And so, if you're, for example, a morning person, the hour between 7 and 8 a.m. could be the most powerful hour in your day because you're most focused, you have the most energy, you feel the most creative during this time. Whereas something between 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you might feel a little bit sluggish and you're not as creative, or you feel a little fatigued or tired. And so when I think about a to-do list, I always like to overlap it with, what are some of the power hours in your day when you are most energized and creative? And if we can kind of overlap these, where if you have to do something creative, you don't want to do it in the afternoon when you're the most sluggish. Like that doesn't make any sense in my head. However, if you need to get some creative work done, like for me, it's a lot of times writing. I get my best writing done usually early in the morning. As soon as I wake up, kind of get my day going and have my coffee or tea and then start writing, then I feel really good about it. But if I have to do it later in the day, I can, but there's a lot more resistance coming up. So I like to think about how can I overlap these things.
So that's first of all, I've never heard that term time arbitrage before, and I really really like that because I talk about peak time and prime time, which is your sort of 90-minute period of the day where you're really at your best. But I've never sort of put in that context that there's certain hours of the day that just are more valuable to others, and you find people that fight that so much. That's the thing that's always so. It's not frustrating because I've seen it so often, but it's so fascinating to me sometimes because like I have a client right now who was complaining that like that they'll get up 10 minutes before a meeting basically, and like they'll make it to the meeting but they'll get up 10 minutes before, and it's just this sort of mad rush and they wish they could just get up earlier. And first of all, I was like, getting up earlier is not the objective measure of success. It doesn't work that way. Some people just are not designed that way, and to fight against that, especially when you do have the flexibility, if you are an entrepreneur, for example, I just don't know where that comes from. There's like this inherent like human need to struggle sometimes. Like it doesn't have to be as hard as people make it.
Well, especially for entrepreneurs, there's sometimes this pride associated with going through the struggle and doing the hard thing and being this superhuman person. And there's this other side as well where things don't have to be that hard, right? And when I think about being an entrepreneur, being a founder, one of the, I think, highest values among all entrepreneurs is freedom. And when it comes to freedom, I think freedom of choice, but also freedom of how you spend your time is something that founders should think about more often. Because if you got into business, I think freedom is one of your highest values. And why would you then self-defeat yourself by setting up a schedule where that doesn't live up to your value of freedom? So if you're someone who is not a morning person whatsoever, you're kind of like a night owl, why would you then get up early and do a 9 a.m. meeting with your team or something like that when it doesn't line up with your business or how you run your day-to-day life, right? So as a founder, I think you have to think about that as well, because at the end of the day, it's your business and how you want to run it, and you pick the people and you pick how you want to work. Now there's a really weird gray area once you start building a big team that, you do have to show up. And then once you kind of have like a senior team in place, then that kind of like switches a little bit. But for the most part, for most people who are small entrepreneurs or run a small business, you can dictate your schedule and how you want to live your life. And I think if you put some time and attention behind that, then there's no point to waking up early if you don't want to. If you're a night owl, hey, run your business at night if you want to, right? There's just a lot of value in that because you have the freedom of choice to do that. That's one of the reasons you got into it. So if you don't take that in consideration, I think you're wasting a lot of time and talent there.
Yeah, absolutely. And now you more so than me, I believe, work with a lot of people who are employees. And so what do you see as some of the, because I think it's easy for somebody who is an employee to say like, oh, these techniques work for founders, work for entrepreneurs, but like, I can't implement this stuff. I don't have that flexibility. I don't have that control. What do you say to that? What do you think are some of the more effective things for those people to focus on?
Yeah. So for a lot of employees, the thing that they struggle with is they usually have a fixed amount of time between 9 to 5, for example. And oftentimes they can't get their stuff done in the daytime. So they have to bring work home with them. So they end up working more hours when their pay usually doesn't actually relate to that and doesn't increase, right? Whereas with entrepreneurs, it sometimes does, or at least you have the flexibility to have no income ceiling in that sense. So that's one thing. The other thing I'm seeing is entrepreneurs are willing to invest more money because they know that they can make that money back in some shape or form, right? So if they're investing in more tools or more money in coaching or training, they know there's a ROI on that. Whereas with most employees, if you tell them like install this tool, you should invest this course or training, that performance might not translate into a higher pay right away or in the near future. It might be 2 months later, it could be like a year later or 2 years later, right? So there's the ROI trade-off that people have to think about as well. And then the other thing is related to the schedule earlier is oftentimes, especially if you're in higher level in the company, you have back-to-back meetings. Like I've seen people's calendars, and this will give you a heart attack, Ari, where they literally are in the Zoom meeting from 9 a.m. till 5, back to back with no breaks in between whatsoever, because they have to be on different team meetings. They have to, give feedback on different things. And so as a result, the byproduct of all of that is just unhealthy lifestyles, like sitting all day, eating unhealthy. And there's, all these byproducts that come from that, slow you down. You feel fatigued, you don't eat that healthy, you don't look great, you don't feel great. And these are all things that we need to address.
So it's funny, actually, I read this study that just came out of Stanford that basically was describing what they're calling Zoom fatigue, which you knew there had to be a study about Zoom fatigue at some point come out. But basically what they pointed out, which I thought was really funny, is that in a normal human situation where you're sort of like this close to somebody, you're doing one of two things, fighting or fucking, basically. Right. So like so this constant Zoom thing where we're like this close to you all the time is just like really overloading for our brains and like activates all these sort of amygdala responses and things. So being on Zoom 9 to 5 is
well, especially if you have like 10 people on there and you have like the gallery view where you see all 10 of them and everyone's doing something different. Like one is cooking in the kitchen, another person is like all up and close. Someone's like multitasking, doing other things on the computer.
Somebody's walking around because they're on their phone and they're like,
yeah, exactly. And it's just so distracting, right? So one of the things we did a podcast on Zoom fatigue a while back. And one of the best things you can do is just have the one view on, right? So when the one person is speaking, you only look at that person because you don't want to look at what everyone else is doing, because then like you're saying, your brain is just going 100 miles an hour, like thinking about, and especially if you're speaking, you can get really self-conscious, because if you see like 10 million people looking and doing different things, you might say, oh, did I do something wrong, right? Why is this person not engaged? And that's same thing when you're speaking on stage. Like you can't pay attention to every single person, because if you see someone going down the aisle, because they have to go to the bathroom or something, and that throws you off, well, that's going to affect everyone else that's sitting there, right? So you can't pay attention to that.
Yeah, no, it's totally. So what are some of the top tools that you're currently using? Maybe they're new, maybe they're not, but what are some of your top tools?
I'm a big fan of 1Password. So managing your passwords in one particular app. Big fan of that. I think one of the first tools that people should install, whether you're on Android, iOS, Mac, or Windows, like use a password manager so that you only have to memorize one password and can log into all of your accounts very quickly. And it's a huge time saver as well, especially if you're on your phone all the time. Being able to log in very quickly or even just on different devices. Highly recommend that. So there's LastPass out there as well. I've used both, and I'm a big fan of 1Password.
Yeah.
For the longest time, I had 1Password for personal and LastPass for company, but then I switched everything over to 1Password, and it was just so much better.
So I actually, and they might have fixed this at this point, but I had a team member hack LastPass. So 1Password actually, in my experience, is a lot more secure.
Oh, wow. I did not know about that. Okay.
It was a really basic, like he was just messing around. He figured out this like workaround in LastPass. It was pretty basic actually. And so, yeah, 1Password has been, in my experience, way more secure. It's a great tool.
Yeah, so that's one that I really like. I think I'm obsessed with tracking my mail or like packages. So the app that I use is Deliveries.
Ah,
Yeah, so you can the beautiful thing about this particular app is it's Mac and iOS only, but you can have an executive assistant or someone else forward emails to your particular email address, and it will automatically put it into the app. So that way I don't have to do it myself, right? Because most apps you kind of have to use the app and then punch it in. With this one, you can have an email address, and then someone else can also log into the online interface and then enter stuff there. So my executive assistant can then also like buy stuff for me, enter the tracking code, and then I'll always have an idea every single day of what's coming in. And that's just maybe an OCD part of me. It's just like I like to know when my packages are arriving. So
yeah.
Deliveries is an app that I use, especially
I
if you're
like that.
someone who lives in a neighborhood where packages get stolen. Like that's a big thing now in the last 2 years. This is a really useful app as well. So I think the company's called June Cloud, and they create this app called Deliveries. So that's something. Going back to the biohacking idea, I'm a big fan of the Aura Ring, something I check every single day as soon as I wake up to kind of see what my sleep was like. Sometimes I will adjust my day and my schedule based on how I'm feeling, based on what I'm seeing there. So if I'm not feeling that great, then I'll definitely skip out on a workout and reschedule it for another day. I've learned a lot about my sleep and just how I function best and how much sleep I need and like how I respond to certain foods and time of eating. So, for example, I know if I eat beyond 8 o'clock and when I'm trying to go to bed around 10:30, 11, I typically don't sleep as well because my body's still breaking down foods from the 8 o'clock dinner. So, I'm a very social person, so I like to stay out with friends and have late night dinners, but I'll reserve it for Fridays and Saturdays when I'm usually off work. So yeah, definitely an Aura Ring. Even if you're not into biohacking whatsoever, you just want to learn about your body and how it functions. I think it's really eye opening just to track it for a month and see what that data says.
Cool. Okay. So the last question that I like to ask is, what is your top piece of advice for people to be more effective? And you can interpret that however you like.
I think since most of us here are founders and entrepreneurs, I think the number one thing you should do is hire an executive assistant. I think that's one of the best investments you'll make in your business. If you're making over $100,000, you should really start looking into this as soon as possible. Because you'll have the time and money and resources to pay that person. And the good thing is you don't have to hire someone full time. You don't need someone full time right away. To be honest, my executive assistant works maybe 15 hours a week right now. And that's after many years of working with me. And she started off, working 3 to 4 hours a week with me just to get things rolling. So whether you're speaking, traveling a lot, or just need some admin help in your day-to-day business, freeing up that time, the 3-4 hours a week, just to start off with, can exponentially grow your business because now you can redirect that time, energy, and focus on the things that make money Or if you're in the later stage of business, free up the time to do other things that you particularly enjoy. So for me, it's like more travel time. It's spending time with family and friends, or oftentimes sleeping more. I love to nap and sleep. And so anytime I can free up through my executive assistant, I will know how to redirect that to things that I particularly enjoy right now. So get an executive assistant if you don't have one yet.
Tan Pham of Asian Efficiency, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so we have a newsletter at asianefficiency.com where we send out weekly productivity tips and strategies. And then we also have a podcast called The Productivity Show. So you can check us out there as well.
Cool. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.